Hello and welcome back to Bunnyhoo Studio. So I became obsessed with the Apothecary Diaries on a day when I was feeling really tired and had overworked myself for quite a few weeks without a break. I looked up some anime recommendations and just happened to see a comment suggesting this one. I barely even looked into what it was about. I just wanted to spend my day resting and escaping into a story. I did not expect it to be so complex with such nuanced characters, and it inspired me to create my first ever piece of fan art, and that is what I'm working on today. I'm Emily and I'm a dip pen and ink illustrator. My work primarily focuses on nature, animals and folklore, but I've also been teaching myself to make art dolls if you also want to check out my crafting videos. I think partly because I love drawing an array of plants and flowers and have a special love for expressing movement with flowing hair, a portrait of Maomao would be so much fun to create, as she is obsessed with poisons and herbs and is constantly jumping into tufts of grass and getting excited about rare funguses. Because of this, I had a feeling this piece would be exactly the kind of illustration I would love to create. For those that know nothing about the Apothecary Diaries, it is a Japanese anime series set in a fantasy version of the Tang dynasty in China. It begins with a young girl called Maomao, who is working as an apothecary for her adoptive father in the pleasure district of the city. Maomao grew up in the brothel as a young child until she was taken in by Luomen. One day she is kidnapped and forced to work in the rear palace as a serving girl. Her kidnappers take her cut of the money while she is there. The contracts last for around 2 years, and Maomao resigns herself to keep her head down and out of trouble until those 2 years are up. That is, until a palace mystery piques her interest. The emperor's high consorts keep getting sick, and their young infants too. Due to her knowledge with poisons, Maomao figures out that the face powder they are using is poisonous, and finds a covert way to warn one of the consorts. She ties a note to a flower and leaves it by their window. When one of the consorts and her baby start to become immediately better, she lets the head eunuch of the rear palace know about the note. And this is just a side note to say that the only men that are allowed into the rear palace are eunuchs. What gives Maomao away is that she is one of the few serving girls who can read and write. Jinshi, the head eunuch, summons all the serving girls and holds up a note, and when he sees that Maomao has a visible reaction to what's written, he knows that she must be the one who wrote the note. Maomao is very worried. She thinks she is going to get into a lot of trouble. She is constantly aware that she could be one bad move away from losing her life, or her head, as she likes to remind us. It turns out, though, that the consort wants to thank Maomao, and assigns her in a much higher position, although she's surprised when the other ladies-in-waiting seem to be pitying her. It's soon revealed that she has been assigned as a poison taster for the consort. Maomao, however, is delighted. She is excited for this opportunity to try out new poisons, one of her favourites being pufferfish. She talks about how much she loves the tingling sensation that fills her mouth. She really loves poison. At one event, when she is a poison taster, she looks like she's enjoying some soup so much that despite her announcing it as poison, someone eats it anyway, not believing her. She even begs Jinshi, the head eunuch, to give her more of the soup. Jinshi quickly learns that Maomao is incredibly sharp and knowledgeable, and seems to have a skill for solving mysteries, using her vast knowledge of medicine and poison. Maomao begins helping Jinshi with various mysteries around the rear palace. So I heard that some people were bothered by season 1 feeling very episodic, and something that is really enjoyable is that all the small things that don't necessarily seem relevant or important at the start all tie together in season 2 to a larger arc and storyline. Some relevant things about Maomao that will help explain aspects of what I'm drawing. Maomao is very small. Due to her upbringing, she grew up quite malnourished, and this probably stunted her growth development. She also has freckles across her nose, which are considered at the time to be an imperfection that makes her less attractive. This is something that becomes important in season 1, which is why I'm mentioning it. Maomao isn't meant to be hideous by any means, and the whole conversation of if anyone really is even hideous is a whole other topic. But in relation to the time period and the beauty standards at the time, Maomao's main concern is survival. She doesn't want to look noticeable. She wants to look as plain and as normal as possible. A lot of people find this kind of funny though, because she can't help but fling herself into dangerous situations due to her unending curiosity. I decided to draw her with her usual hairstyle she wears every day, but combine it with the hanfu outfit she wears at the spring garden party. Usually she wears a very simple outfit that's loose-fitting, but I wanted something a bit more flowy for this piece. I wanted this portrait to very much have Maomao as the focus, but I did really want to think of a way of incorporating Jinshi into the composition. I decided to have him behind her, with his eyes mostly downturned so as not to take away the focus from her. And I plan on having his long hair flowing around the top half of the drawing. In the beginning, the head eunuch character of Jinshi is not very likable, and Maomao dislikes him too. In the books, Jinshi is described as a celestial nymph. He is so beautiful that you feel painfully aware of your own flaws in his presence. Everywhere he walks, he is fawned over and admired by both men and women. Every time Jinshi touches Maomao in an attempt to manipulate her with his beauty, she visibly shudders and flicks his hands away. She also looks at him with some impressively crafted scowls that Jinshi begins to become quite fond of. As the two solve more mysteries together, Maomao begins to see parts of Jinshi's true character underneath the facade. Where before she describes him as a sparkly leech, she begins seeing moments where he seems more serious and at the same time more childlike. She comments that she finds him much easier to deal with when he's behaving this way, which is interesting because his behaviour could be seen in these moments as almost being more difficult, but Maomao seems to respond to this much better. As we see more parts of these characters, we learn of Jinshi's own insecurities of feeling like he is only his face, as that is all he has ever been valued for his whole life primarily. We learn that he is running away from huge responsibilities. Here I am drawing the hairpin that Jinshi gives to Maomao at the beginning of the series, and the whole illustration will be filled with little references to herbs, poisons, and moments throughout the story. The only thing that is a bit of a shame, I wish that I had added the hairpin that Shisui gave to her in her other hand, but I hadn't gotten to that part of the anime at the time I was creating this. Instead, I looked up the design for a traditional Tang Dynasty knife, as I thought it could be one that she uses to cut herbs. For Jinshi's face, I decided to take more inspiration from the manga by Neko Kurage rather than the anime. I think the manga makes him look far more celestial and androgynous. I also took some inspiration from the way Griffith is drawn in the manga Berserk. He also looks very celestial and beautiful, and combined I came up with this. I'm really happy with his face, and I especially love that he is looking down at Maomao. He looks almost protective and angel-like, which honestly conveys his true essence, I feel. Jinshi comes to care very deeply for Maomao, and at times this can be expressed in a very offbeat and not entirely appropriate way. Maomao is completely oblivious and refuses to acknowledge certain pieces of information she could very easily figure out. That's the funny and frustrating aspect to the anime at times. Maomao can solve every mystery except for the one right in front of her, and it's really because she just doesn't want to. Jinshi tries to find a way into Maomao's heart by finding her rare and unusual poisons. Her personal favourite is the ox bezoar, which she completely loses her mind over at the detriment of Jinshi, who is trying to tell her plot-changing information, but she does not care. All she can see is her and her beautiful poisons. An aspect of the anime that people have really connected with, though, is not necessarily their growing friendship. It is actually the role of women and the friendships between them that are exceptionally refreshing. It could be easy to listen to a lot of this and wonder if our protagonist falls into the trap of being not like the other girls. This trope is a way of pitting women against each other by saying because this character is not the norm, they are therefore better than the others. A simple example of this would be makeup. It could be seen that the story wants you to think that Maomao is better than the other women she is surrounded by because she chooses not to wear makeup and dress in a more colourful or feminine way. But Maomao doesn't dislike makeup or beautiful clothes. In fact, she grew up in a brothel with girls who she refers to as her sisters, being very beautiful and loved by many. Dressing this way just doesn't suit what Maomao wants and needs in order to survive. She doesn't want to become a courtesan, she wants to study poisons and look after her adoptive father. But the story doesn't express this in a way that puts her above others. Maomao likes the women that are in her life and wants the best for them. We see Maomao throughout the show uplifting and helping the women around her, who are often no really more free than slaves. She makes a point of saying that although it has technically been abolished, really it still exists. Her sisters cannot leave the brothel until someone pays the madam their debts. Likewise, the women working in the rear palace cannot leave, and many of them were sold by family members or trafficked like Maomao. Even in terms of Jinshi, she constantly acknowledges that he is beyond beautiful, unfathomably so. She completely understands why people are on their knees admiring him. She doesn't look down on them or see herself as better just because she doesn't have the same reaction to him. Because of the way Maomao was brought up, she sees romance as a transactional thing. She has never seen or experienced real romantic love. Her biggest defense mechanism is her pragmatism and how detached she is from her own feelings. And this makes her an unreliable narrator. A lot of what Maomao's inner dialogue does not match up with her actions. She will be saying, "I don't care about anyone but myself," all the while trying to save everyone around her. It is this solidarity between the women in this world that are put into horrible and compromising positions where they are mostly just pawns that people find so refreshing. Maomao wins the hearts of the women around her because she does not judge them due to the way they look or the position they are forced into, but rather who they really are at their core. What I find really intriguing about the story as well is how it feels the characters develop in such a realistic way. The changes are small and gradual, and by the end of season 2, we finally see Maomao slowly breaking past her wall after experiencing a great loss, but it is only the tiniest amount. There is no great outburst, because really that is a privilege. Maomao needs to survive and go on working. She can't fall apart. A lot of people find the slow burn aspect of her relationship with Jinshi frustrating, but to me it is one of my favourite parts. Partly because the Apothecary Diaries is a mystery court drama anime and not a romance, and partly because it just wouldn't make sense for it to be anything but a slow process. It would be a detriment to the character development for Maomao to suddenly understand her feelings with clarity and jump into something completely life-changing that she might not even want. Maomao wants to study poisons and live long enough to do so. So I have been inking the outlines of some objects that are relevant throughout the story. Those round things were the ox bezoars she loves, and the insect legs were cordyceps that are used in Chinese medicine. They are a type of fungus that infects an insect and takes control of its nervous system. The zombies in The Last of Us were based on this fungus. There is also a frog to her lower left. If you know, you know. The frog is a major spoiler, and you will see a lot of frog jokes referenced in the comment sections of anything relating to this anime. Lots of mushrooms too. Maomao gets very excited about mushrooms. I'm also adding a snake that has some relevance in season 2, and also I just like it compositionally. I'm now going to add lots of foliage and grass at the bottom of this piece, framing the edges. Most of my illustrations have dark inked backgrounds, and I usually either do this with stippling, which is lots of tiny dots, scribbles, which is a personal favourite of mine, or densely inked foliage and grass. This piece is going to have all of those. I'm now inking these flowers, azaleas. There's a really funny scene where Maomao plucks one of these and sucks the nectar, and then Jinshi copies her and she promptly tells him it's poisonous and he spits it out in horror. I'm also adding jasmine flowers as the tea becomes relevant in the series too, and also features a funny moment between the two of them. Something I think the anime also can't beat is the amazing faces that Nekokurage draws for Maomao in the manga. There are some truly stunning facial expressions, and it adds so much humour to the story, changing the style from more serious to more cartoonish, known as chibi, which is where the characters are drawn to look small and childlike to convey a humorous aspect of their personality or behaviours. And now to add all of Jinshi's beautiful flowing hair. This is one of the parts I was more nervous about drawing, as I had a really specific idea of how I wanted it to look, and when you're inking you can't really reverse your mistakes. It's why I always focus a lot on getting the pencil lines as accurate as possible from the start. The flowers are going to sit between Jinshi's locks that will then flow around Maomao. It can be tricky drawing long curving lines with a dip pen, but I find if you break up the line so you can turn the paper to get a better angle, this can work quite well. But a lot of this is just practice. Learning the best way to hold the nib for you, and also using the right kind of paper. I'm using Bristol illustration paper, and it is so smooth that the lines flow perfectly. I had been used to a slightly more textured paper beforehand, so at first it felt almost too smooth, and I felt a bit out of control. But I'm really used to it now, and I really love using this paper. I bought it in a larger size, I think A3, which means I can easily cut it to the dimensions that I want to. It's also a lot more liberating than working out of a sketchbook like I was doing for years. And now to fill the background. This lower half will be densely inked lines expressing long flowing grass. It can actually be pretty relaxing doing this for hours, and I think inking the grass this way might be quicker than my scribbled backgrounds, and I love the effect it creates too. If Maomao's obsession is poison, mine is definitely inking and creating illustrations. Perhaps in another universe, we could be the perfect team. I could create illustrated books of her findings, and she could find and research the poisons I will then draw. I forgot to say, you may have noticed that her left arm is bandaged, and this is because since she was young, she actually experimented on herself with poisons on her left arm. I'm curious if they explore this aspect of her personality more in the books. I've read up to the end of season 2, so I think I'm going to continue as I don't feel like waiting until I'm 50 to find out what happens to the whole story. I'm curious if the topic is ever explored as something she does due to her suppressed emotions, or whether it is purely just the length she will go to for her special interest. Or perhaps it's a bit of both, and each time the experiment might have slightly different motivations. Due to the environment that the characters are brought up in, often it's in their best interest to play certain roles, and this becomes a theme that is tantamount in the latter half of season 2. It is also why Jinshi the eunuch begins to connect so much to Maomao. To almost everyone, save for a few, Jinshi is just a very beautiful face, and as such, he plays this seemingly serene and celestial character within the inner palace. But when he realizes Maomao really dislikes this character he plays, he begins to let his guard down more and more around her. She can see through him and therefore becomes one of the few people that really sees Jinshi. Regardless of status or upbringing, Jinshi will always be Jinshi to Maomao, and this is something that without her realizing really draws him to her. Although she really knows very little about him, she sees the parts of him that are at his core. These come out in the sillier and the more serious moments between them. They are clumsy and often misunderstand one another, because they are always communicating through this kind of fog. Maomao, who struggles to express herself and even recognize her true feelings, often finds people quite confusing, and is never sure how to handle more complex and emotional situations. The only times we see her truly carefree is when she has a rare poison in her hands, and we begin to see this side of her grow more as she finds friends for the first time too. And Jinshi, more emotional and sheltered, frequently misunderstands what Maomao is trying to say, or is stopped in his tracks by her abrupt and straightforward responses, often upset when she doesn't quite respond in the way that he would like or expect. He's trying to reach her and is afraid that the gap between them will continue to widen, and so either clumsily tries to talk to become closer, or completely avoids and puts off telling her important information until it's too late. Something that is so enjoyable about the show for me is how fun it is to analyse and understand the characters. The ways in which they are written are quite subtle, and it's not always immediately clear or spelled out why a character might have reacted or said something in a certain way. Usually I do get most of my creative ideas from some sort of narrative inspiration, but I usually find that from books I read, or in particular my interest in old folklore and the original darker fairy tales. I have considered a few times making some fan art over the years, but I could never quite commit to an idea, although thinking about it, it could be fun to make a frieren illustration too, as I think the themes within that align nicely with the types of things I enjoy creating. It would be fun actually to make a Maomao or frieren doll too, although that is a much more time-consuming endeavour as I'm struggling to even finish one doll. I definitely would like to make a doll with elf ears though. And I also really like the idea of giving Maomao a little basket full of rare poisons. She would be really fun to accessorize. I also actually have some drawing ideas that I really want to do that I also think would make really fun videos. I'm planning on drawing some portraits of grumpy princesses with little backstories behind them, and I'm also toying with the idea of drawing some fantasy maps too with some narrative stories behind each place that I'm drawing. So I was also quite nervous about inking the hair, both Jinshi and Maomao's. Because my backgrounds are usually very dark with ink, I like to work with contrast, so tend to give my characters lighter hair. Technically, both these characters have black or very dark brown hair, although in the anime they tend to distinguish characters by giving them coloured hair. Maomao in the anime has very dark green, almost black hair, and Jinshi has deep violet hair. I looked at the manga art and noticed Maomao's hair is shown to be very dark and shiny with strong highlights, and Jinshi's looks a bit more homogeneous. So I decided to keep a lot of Jinshi's hair as light as possible, while adding dimension by making some of the hair dark and thicker lines. And Maomao's I will replicate how the hair is shaded in the manga, and hope that she doesn't melt into the background too much. Something I really don't want is for everything to look really flat at the end, making it hard to distinguish all the small details. I find this can be quite a fine balance when inking a piece. Jinshi's hair was really fun to draw though, and it went a lot better than I was expecting. I don't know why I thought it wouldn't go well. I think I was just worried about getting the shaded balance just right. I wanted the big flowing pieces on top to stay white and unshaded, whilst the dark parts to look like hair strands. The real test will be when I fill the background around him though. And now for my tiny scribbles. I like to think that this has become a kind of unique trademark in a way of my work. I certainly don't think I invented scribbling, of course, but the way it looks like glistening little stars I think is quite unique to my work. It's funny that I came up with this just from my impatience with stippling too. Sometimes finding slightly more efficient ways of working can actually create better results. So I carefully work around each strand of hair, making sure each one has enough uninked paper around it that it still stands out against the ink. I work around the other details like the hairpin and the fingers, making sure each one stands out and doesn't get swallowed into the dark scribbles. I have to frequently clean my nib and re-dip it into the Indian ink. This is the part of the process you don't see much of. Often I can ink a lot of lines before I need to re-dip. I also add a different amount of ink to my nib depending on what I'm doing. When I'm doing the initial lines for everything, I use much less ink, as creating too thick a line could completely ruin the face of a character or a really small detail. I often go in at the end, thickening lines that need to stand out more or that look a little too translucent. Because I often create very dark backgrounds, mistakes can be covered up during this part of the process. If a line comes out too thick, it will often melt into the background once it's finished, but for very small details it's really important that this doesn't happen. I make sure to add lots of sparkles around Jinshi to express his unearthly beauty a little more, and also a kind of nod to the anime genre. A lot can be expressed with a sparkle in anime. It's funny, the genre of anime is so vast. I find it kind of funny when people say they don't like it. And I know why they say that they don't, or at least I think I do. I think they're exposed to one type of anime or a very popular anime that they see it everywhere and they assume that's what anime is all the time. But one of my favourite things about it is how vast it is. I think there's an anime about almost anything, and partly what makes this so intriguing is that oftentimes it's not the blanket topic of the anime that makes it interesting, it's the storytelling within it. I think what really helped me realise this was when I started watching a boxing anime called Hajime no Ippo, and had thought prior that it wasn't a topic that interested me enough to watch a whole show about it. But because the anime is so well written, you end up becoming really invested in something you didn't even think you cared about. A lot of anime suffers from budget issues too, so the animation quality can really swing all over the place depending on the studio and the budget. So if that's something that really bothers you, you should probably pick your anime more carefully. I recently watched Dandadan, and the animation in that is really unique and different from most that I've seen, and is full of surreal and absurd creatures and plots. Frieren is another really beautiful anime that explores existence from the point of view of an elf who is immortal, and what this means for her in terms of her friendships and comrades living for such a short time in comparison, and how she comes to terms with this. The Apothecary Diaries, although on its surface is a mystery anime, seems to me to be much more about characters trying to discover who they are beyond just their position in society, what they really feel and what they really want, and how they can discover and navigate that in a world that is so obsessed with status and the responsibilities that come with that status. A lot of anime deals with how unaddressed trauma can impact us for a lifetime, and the clumsy and imperfect ways we try to traverse that. For me, it's the perfect form of escapism. So Maomao now has eyes. Maomao is frequently drawn as a cat actually, and this reflects her personality and aptly her name too. There's a part in the show where she talks about not particularly liking cats, and then lists off various reasons why people seem to find them so entertaining, not realising she's essentially making a list of all her own qualities and quirks. I'm now also tentatively tackling her hair. You don't see it in the edit, but I'm often thinking a lot in between every few lines I make, deciding how much shading an area needs. I really want to make sure that all the little tufts of hair will stand out against the background. Now that the background and hair are all inked, I need to add the final details to her dress and objects that are surrounding her. This actually took a surprising amount of time. I thought I was almost done with this piece, but I realised there was still lots to do, although the editing will be flying through this part. The dress in particular was something I thought carefully about before starting, wanting to convey the movement as best I could using stippling. I think stippling is a really effective way of shading fabric. You can really create the illusion of folds and bends in the fabric. And here we have the final details of the cordyceps fungus, growing from an insect leg. The oxbezoar here is a lump of ingested material found in the gastrointestinal tract of deer, goats and oxen. It forms layers of calcium and magnesium phosphate that build up around a small piece of plant fibre or a pebble. Over time, stomach contractions sculpt it into a smooth, round shape. It was considered a precious Chinese medicine, able to be an antidote for poison and to clear the heart and liver. And of course the frog. In the books, Maomao makes sure to explain that it is specifically a European frog. I loved adding the texture to the top of these mushrooms. These are called shaggy scallycaps, perhaps one of the best mushroom names I've heard in a while. I tried to add just enough shading to create more dimension, but not so much that the flowers fade into the background. This is really important. And of course Maomao's freckles. I I very nearly almost forgot to add these. Thankfully, my faint penciled lines reminded me. This snake ended up being quite fun to add detail to. I decided to keep a lot of my lines quite loose, and didn't overthink the snake skin pattern too much. I mostly wanted to give the feel of the pattern rather than a perfect replica of how it should look. When adding detail like that to specifically background subjects, a piece can become too busy and homogeneous if you just draw every single spot and detail on everything. I definitely have made that mistake in the past. And here is the finished illustration. What do you think? I'd be curious to hear from those of you that are both familiar and unfamiliar with the show what you think of the drawing. I think it will be interesting to make another piece of them in the future when their friendship or relationship might have developed more or very differently. I wonder how differently I would draw the composition. If you would like to have a print of this in your life, it's actually available in my shop now. The link is down below. Thank you so much for watching, and subscribe if you want to enjoy more cozy art process videos and studio vlogs. I make illustrations and art dolls, and I'm filming everything I am making here. If you prefer your art videos without commentary, I actually have a second art channel linked below with silent drawing videos where you can just enjoy the scratching of my pen nib. Take care.